to deliver the keynote address of the conference. Dr. Udo Becker is a professor of transportation ecology at Dresden University of Technology, Germany. Professor Becker is the chair of transportation ecology, which is the first chair in the field of transport and environment at a German university. He is a founding member of the Dresden Institute of Transport and Environment, Germany. Accordingly, he has been continuously contributing to reducing the negative impacts of transportation on the environment. He was a researcher at the Institute of Transportation, University of Karlsruhe, and a senior consultant and a lecturer in transportation economics at Basel University of Switzerland. Professor Becker's major research is focused on the interactions between environment and transport modes, including sustainable transport development in cities and regions, sustainable mobility worldwide, emissions of road traffic and other modes, energy and carbon dioxide gas emissions in transport worldwide. He is also the author and co-author of books, edited books, journal papers, as well as many conferences and encyclopedia articles. Professor Udo Becker is currently engaged in many researches, and we are proudly mention that he's engaged in research with the University of Murdo at the moment, which is the project on curricular enrichment delivered through the application of location-based services to intelligent transport system, commonly known as LBS2ITS, which aim at enhancing the curricular and teaching and learning environment at Sri Lankan universities. In addition, he is currently engaged in several other projects, including MobiTech, which established mobility reporting as a new planning instrument, Space to Ride, and also Camper Move, which aiming at for the energy efficient campus of the University of Technology in Dresden. Before we are formally handing the floor to Professor Becker, dear participants, please note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the speech. So please feel free to share your questions, suggestions, views, everything in the chat box so we can take them up at the end of the speech. Once again, without wasting more time, Professor Becker, very good morning. With great pleasure, let me warmly invite you to deliver the keynote speech of FARU 2021. Professor.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning from my side as well. Dr. Chandrasekhara, Dr. Samavikrama. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be able to talk to you at this point of the conference. Now, as a keynote speaker, I would like to share some thoughts with you, general thoughts without too much detail. At the start of such an important conference, I think general ideas are more appropriate than any specific details of our research, but I was asked to present some German-speaking research at the time being right now, and I want to express my address. Also, I want to expand it in this respect and talk about our current research at the end of my talk. Now, talking to you from this tiny continent of Europe, which is far away from Sri Lanka, is a privilege, and it's a privilege that is only possible today under these conditions. The pandemia is, of course, not so nice to have, but I'm really excited to cooperate with the partners in the Sri Lanka universities. As Mr. De Silva said, this is a very important project. And please keep in mind that the perspective of my talk is a European perspective. Now, Europe, this tiny continent at the edge of the world, so to say, has its unique history, like all countries of this world have, and we need to realize that all acting is local. So whatever I express in the next few minutes, please adapt it to your local situation. Now, when I was reading the conference program, I want to congratulate on this program. It's 6 sessions, 6 exciting sessions, reflections across space, the many dimensions of space, they are all important in our work. And if you change the location within space, this thing is called transport. And transport is the field where I am coming from. Transport is the field actually I'm talking about right now. Now, let me try to share my screen. I hope this is working right now, and you should all see a blue screen with the topic of my talk today. It's going to be sustainable development in transport. What actually is that supposed to be? And I said there will be two parts. The first one, a larger part, is about the theory standing behind my considerations. And the second part will be about the effects of those theories in the real world, the effects in our research. Now, the background of the conference is sustainable development, and that's a really unclear word. It is used in so many cases without thinking about it. Let me talk about sustainable development. Maybe you are familiar with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They were developed and discussed and presented by the United Nations. And those 17 SDGs, they actually describe the living on this planet. They describe what problems there are, for example, hunger and drought. They describe what we need to study in our societies and universities. That describes also what we need to do, because if there's a problem, well, it's appropriate for us engineers and planners and scientists to do something about it. And what we need to do is also following from these SDG goals. And this is a key compass, an indicator, a lighthouse for us in research. And for you students, it will actually serve as a lighthouse in your career. You can do many, many things and the world is open to you. But if you have to do with those sustainable development goals, if you are working in those fields, there actually is a clear indication of the benefits of the purpose of your work. And it helps because then you can address people and tell them, look, I'm actually helping you. And this, of course, is true for all regions of the world, for Africa, Europe, and Asia as well. Now, how were these sustainable development goals defined? Well, the United Nations, they are discussing many, many things, and they are discussing things for many, many years. They started a series of conference talks in the 70s in Stockholm. And in those talks, all countries, richer and poorer countries, were discussing the future of the planet. What should be done? How should people live on or in all countries of this world? Now, the path of development was a difficult topic because on one side there were the rich countries and they said, we are rich and rich people only rarely want to share. And on the other side, there were not so rich countries, some say less developed countries. I do not share the opinion that those countries are less developed. I will explain in the end. And those countries said, you did colonize us. We want some part of the wealth generated from that back. And the rich countries said no. And there was a huge battle in the conference. And basically the conference series was about to collapse. And then Mrs. Brundtland, she was Prime Minister of Norway, she said, before everybody flies back, are we not agreeing that we want to survive on this planet? And all parties said, survival sounds good to me, yes. So the conference agreed, yes, as human beings on this planet, wherever we live, we want to survive. And then Mrs. Brundtland said, so what would that mean? And everybody started to think about it. Now, the answer lies in human needs, and the word needs will be following me in my talk this morning. You can define human needs in many, many ways. There is one way designed by the American sociologist Maslow, and he said there are many, many needs and they are lying above each other. Of course, humans want to eat something and drink. Well, that's essential. If it's starting to rain, they want to have a roof above their heads. That's also crucial. Housing, we are already in our subject. Then, of course, there are social needs. We want to have friends. We want to be included in the work of our society. And that's common to all people. Then there are maybe individual needs. I want to be independent. I want to have success in my job and so on. Maybe there even is this need of self-fulfillment. I want to work in a creative field. All those needs are important, and they describe what women and men are actually thinking about. Now, as I said, surviving, what actually does this mean? Surviving as human beings? Well, it means your needs have to be satisfied. If you are hungry or starving, we are in trouble. Then, of course, there has to be a solution to this problem. And this solution has to hold for you and your children and your grandchildren, if there are any, and grandchildren and grandchildren, and so on. And this is the key impression and the first point of my speak. Sustainable development holds for all generations following us. And if one generation makes a mistake and by coincidence gets extinct, well, this would be a problem for all following generations as well. So this is a path no generation following us can ever deviate from. And the definition by the United Nations is very clear. We talk about sustainable development. Development, and that is development that meets the needs of the living people on this planet, all of them. But of course, the possible needs of future generations should not be endangered. So there always is a second condition to that. The future generations should have an option to satisfy their needs as well. Now, please note, this definition is open. Again, we do not know how future generations will act, live, and what problems they face. So the conditions and requirements and the solutions will need to change over time. And please also note, there is not such a thing as a state of sustainability. We cannot say, okay, after many years of hard work, we are complying with the definition, problem solved, we forget about it. As the thing is open for the future, well, we can always only become a little bit less unsustainable. Less unsustainable means leave some more options for future generation. And the question for us engineers is always, how unsustainable is a certain country, is a certain city, is a certain transport mode? Now, what does that mean for transport? Can we translate this definition onto transport? Yes, we can. And there is one crucial chart, and you will find this chart in all of my lectures, being on the bachelor or master level, being in German or English language. This chart describes in a very, very simple way how in transport things come together. And in the center of the chart, there is an individual decision. So company CEOs or household members, parents or children, they, on a day-to-day basis, take some decisions about transport. And that is because there are needs in the upper left corner. This is this pyramid of Mr. Maslow. Now, if a need is not possible to satisfy at home, for example, I'm hungry and there is no bread available anymore, then you have to move, change space. Now, the decision about your movement is, of course, shaped by the world, this round thing in the upper right corner, and by the options you have. In some cities, you can just walk across the street and by foot, perfect. In other cities, think of the United States, you have to jump in your car, there is no other option, no buses running, and you have to drive for 20 kilometers and 20 kilometers back. The only option is car. So you see, transport politicians and planners shape the world, and in this world, people, company officials, household members, they take decisions, and then they change space. Movement occurs. Now, whenever we face movement in the real world, we have two aspects to consider. Number one, why is this person moving? Or why is this good moving? That's the purpose. That's the indicator of success, the objective function. And the second question, how actually is this carried out? Now, that's a question of the instrument. It's just a second degree question. How is it carried out? The result is always in your work in transport. Make a difference between access. In Germany, we have the word mobility, Mobilität. But in English presentations, I prefer access. Somebody is reaching a destination. And make a distinction to traffic. The objective is Mobilität, mobility. That's the need, that's the cause. In English, it's the end. And how it is carried out, that you can connect to the word traffic. We need traffic lanes and traffic vehicles and traffic regulations, but that's just the mean to achieve this objective. Now, Sustainable Development Goals are about the future. How do you personally want to have your city, your village, your country in the future? I have no idea how your preferences are, but I would suggest that actually humans are important and mobility is a human right. We are not entitled to lock in people at home or in some other place. They have a right to reach a doctor if they are sick. They have a right to reach the school if they want to get education. They have a right to reach the shop if they want to buy things, and the job if they want to work. And to see relatives, of course, they also have a right to. Now, how actually would you like your children and grandchildren to have this right executed? Well, it would be a good idea if they do it, let's say, with less instruments and less resources, less money, of course, maybe less time, less pollution, of course, less accidents. Accidents are really not nice. Less noise. Noise is also an ugly thing from transport. Less climate change, less waste, less area consumption, less space spoilage, less traffic. And that is the crucial thing. At this point of my talk, I'm talking about less traffic. If you approach your Minister of Transport in your country and tell them we want to have less traffic, he might react ugly. So please approach him and tell him we want to satisfy mobility needs of all parts of the population, and he might agree or she might agree. And a second later, you tell them, wouldn't it be a nice idea to do it with less costs and less effort and less pollution and less climate change and less accidents and less traffic? And that's the point where we really have to be clear in our research. Now, the conclusion is obvious again. The objective function is to guarantee mobility. Step one, important, with less traffic. Step two, less important, but also essential. Now, to some extent, the future is your choice. You can build a city and a country and a future with a lot of traffic and little mobility. A lot of traffic means people have to travel a long distance for each and every need. Probably they need vehicles with high speed, because if there is a long distance to cover before you reach the next shop, well, the vehicle should be fast. And you need cheap traffic because the distance is so long. If the kilometer costs are high, you cannot afford it. So in scenario A, you have to travel a long way with engines at a high speed, and costs per kilometer have to be cheap. So make traffic cheap again, but then you have only little mobility as all destinations are far away. And if you need something just the next minute, you cannot reach it. Now that path I call the path of Perth in Australia, or Denver, Colorado, or some other city you may think of. And there's a second path, path B. You can build a city and a country in the future with a lot of mobility for everybody, for the rich and the poor, and only little traffic when everything is nearby, when space is allocated wisely. You have to have high density. You have to have high costs per kilometer, because if costs per kilometer are high, people think about low distance near solutions. You have to think about walking and biking. Walking and biking are so important, almost no costs, and you're reaching a destination. You have to talk about sharing transport. And within this conference, that's an overriding topic. We have to talk about density, diversity, and design. These three issues are crucial and essential. And in transport, your needs, your mobility needs should be satisfied nearby. We can adapt the definition of sustainable development to transport. That's in the lower part. Mobility needs of the present population. So give mobility, give access with less money, less resources, less climate change for future generations. They will hate it. Less traffic. Now, the conclusion is obvious. Sustainable development in transport comes to the same objective function: guarantee mobility for all, and that is especially for poorer ones, for elderly, for children, with less traffic. We learned that in Europe the hard way. Europe is not setting an example. 400 years ago, we had only few roads, and some villages were not connected to the network. So what we did was connect these villages to the network. And of course, people could travel, and there was a lot of space available in the villages. So they built large houses and they traveled for everything to this city in the upper part of the picture. And when you have that, you get congestion. Whatever your road network, whatever your transport network looks like, there always is one point of least capacity. And this thing is called bottleneck. And here you have congestion. Now, if you approach the mayor of your city and tell him, oh, here is congestion, we got a problem, what is he probably thinking? Well, the answer is so obvious. He thinks about relieving congestion, and that is done by building this new red road. Whenever we had a problem with congestion in Europe, we expanded the network. We built an extra road, an extra railroad, an extra airport. Building was the solution to every problem we ever had. Now what happens? If we are building, we are making traffic more attractive. And if traffic is more attractive in marketplace societies, people use it. No surprise. So a few years later, we had even more congestion at the newly built bridge and in the lower parts of the network at the bottom of the slide. In the low right corner, you see 4 new houses, and those are new built houses because we built this red bridge over the river as a relief for congestion. After this bridge was built, the neighborhood shop in the little village had to close. Competition from the supermarket was too strong. But the supermarket had to expand the area, and he needed a parking space. A couple of houses were torn down, and those people, they moved to the lower right corner of this map and built new houses. Now, wonderful for them, but whenever there is a need to be satisfied with regard to mobility by those people, they have to travel a long distance. And that was not the appropriate solution. It had to be that way. From the economic point of view, this was obvious and we should have known beforehand. This chart is known to all of you if they are studying Economics 101 in a university. It's about sinking marginal benefits, and we all understand the concept. In the bottom line, there is the number of goods we are consuming in our household, in our village, in our city, in our company, it doesn't matter. And On the other axis, we have the benefits. So we draw a chart of the benefits for the first good consumed and the second and the third. And as you see from the chart, yes, the very first piece of bread you have in the morning, that's really important. But if you had 4 of them, number 5, this slice of bread maybe might be too much. The first car in a village, very important. Maybe the doctor has it or the fire department. If we have villages, 100 people in Germany and 110 cars, what is the benefit of the additional car in this village? It's close to nil. And if you build and have more resources and more cars, the benefits are actually negative, but the costs in transport, we have jumping costs. The first road is the cheapest. The last road goes through a tunnel and over a bridge is the most expensive one. We approach an area where benefits are smaller than costs. And that tells you economics, of course, you shouldn't do that. That is inefficient. Let me conclude. There is this agenda 1 of mankind, and I call it more is better, and we understand it. If you are asking your first job, do you want to have more as a salary? Most people would say yes. Now, in the beginning, if you don't have a road, if you don't have a car, if you don't have things to eat and houses to live in, more is better, yes. This is more development, more growth, more mobility, and it might still be the case in some countries of this planet. But at least in Germany, we barely managed to keep the same level of mobility with ever-growing amounts of energy, of space. We have more cars, we have longer distances, more noise, more pollution. Sometimes it goes back with new engines, but then we have more cars and more engines, and the positive effects are compensated again. We have more taxes to pay because those roads have to be maintained. We have more illnesses. People get sick because of pollution and noise. And we have benefits for the rich and the fast using this infrastructure and for the traveling. And for the poorer, elderly, younger parts of the population, they get excluded. And that's the worst thing you want to have. I call this inefficient and unfair, and it's not sustainable at all. In Europe, we did realize, and European Commission and the European Parliament, they express it very clearly, we have to reverse the path of development by 180 degrees. We call this Verkehrswende, traffic turnaround. Now we had to learn it the hard way. If we had read Local Agenda 21, that is a document developed in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in 1992, we should have known. If you look up this document, it's now 30 years old, it states very clearly in chapter 7.52, reduction of travel demand, point A, and promotion of public transport, point B, and promotion of walking and biking, point C, and integration with regional planning, with space allocation, information exchange, that's what we are doing in universities anyway, and the change of the patterns of consumption and production. Now that was part 1. What is the theory behind sustainable development in transport? Let me just explain in a few slides what this means in the work of our university department. First of all, sustainable development makes things more complex. You have to think twice. And obvious solutions are sometimes not valid anymore. Of course, you have to study, research, and teach the basics. All the things that were developed in the past are still part of our program, and I will show you a couple of research fields where we are working on right now. All those you see on your screen in bold letters, I will explain with a picture. The other one I will explain in just a few sentences. So at the chair of transport ecology, we have to talk about emission factors of transport in real world obvious, and we have to monitor and evaluate the effects of the measures of society. For example, we have climate protection plans in all German cities. We have to get rid of CO2. It's obvious, no diesel, no petrol fuel in a couple of years anymore. And you have to monitor and evaluate this. Monitoring and evaluation is, I would say, a quarter of our work. There is innovation and technology. German government decided we want to have electric trolley trucks. I will talk about it. And there is this daily consulting and advising business. Very often I get a call by a city and they tell me we want to optimize our traffic lights. Sounds good. Optimize traffic lights. And I have to tell them, be very careful. Because if you make it more attractive for cars, you will get more cars. Now there is part 2, this sustainable development research. Again, focus on people instead on vehicles. We had a wonderful project, Transport Learning. It was financed by the European Union, and we went out to city administration in 8 countries, and in local native language, we trained them in many, many issues with regard to sustainable development. That project is finished. The material is still available. We have, of course, technology also in our SD research part. There is Movebis. It's a Latin word, not an English one. Smartphone data for bicycle planning. We have Mobilbericht Berlin. That's a mobility report for parts of the city of Berlin. I will talk about it. And we have metamorphosis, a Greek word, and it just means change or transformation. We want to transform our neighborhoods, our spaces. We want to build streets for children. That's also an EU project financed by the European government. Now, project B1, real world emission factors. That's a typical screenshot. We go out and measure how vehicles are behaving. And as I said, they should not run faster at a certain stretch. Here we have the example of a 2.8 kilometer long road. Vehicles on the left-hand side stopping many, many times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 times, and accelerating to 60 or 80 kilometers again. And in the right, upper right-hand side of the chart, they are moving with more or less a constant flow, homogeneous flow. And they need the same time for the same distance, but pollution is widely different. As you see in the lower part with nitrogenous oxide, we have a difference of 50%. So you can get 50% reduction by just making traffic flow more stable, but not faster. That's a prerequisite, important thing. As I said, the German government wants to promote electric trucks, so we have to rebuild our German Autobahn. Strange. We have many, many thousands of kilometers of Autobahn where trucks are running on diesel fuel, and they want to have a trolley line. As you see on the picture, we already have 8 kilometers. Our university evaluates that program. It's still in progress, but I can tell you it's very, very costly and dangerous and complex and not so easy. By the way, in Europe, we have already a transport mode that is running on electric energy on tracks. Oh, this is called railroad. We already have a railroad. And it's not a good idea to build a second one. It's just too costly. It would be a good idea to support the first mode we already have. That will be the result of this project. Talking about sustainable transport projects, for many, many years, we developed a tool that uses the smartphone data of people using bicycles in traffic. You get approval from those people, and we did it for all of Germany. We get millions and millions of rides on bikes in Germany. And if you get so many, you can draw charts and maps. This is a map of Dresden. And those data, if you evaluate and study them, tells you where people are using their bikes, where not, how they are using their bike, whether there is deceleration or even an accident when it stops suddenly. There are also other indicators built into your smartphones. So we get a lot of data about safety issues, about problems, about transport planning, and we are providing those informations to all cities and villages. They can study it and then adapt their measures. That's a very important tool, thanks to all data providers. We are also preparing materials for the government. Now, the capital of Germany is Berlin. It's divided in 9 parts. One of those parts is called Berlin-Pankow. It's an area with roughly 410,000 people. It's not so large, 100 square kilometers. And the mayor approached us and said, I was only talking about traffic all of my life, but actually I'm mayor for people, not mayor for cars. What about the mobility of the people? And we told him, nobody knows about the mobility of people. Which children can play in the neighborhood, which not? Which elderly people reach the doctor by walking and which not? Which people can buy nearby and which not? So we had a wonderful study program for many years. Where are people living? Where can they buy? Where are they buying food? And which problems encounter them? And we decided to prepare a report that has to be decided and discussed by the Parliament of Berlin-Pankow every year. And in the report, it does not state there is a parking problem in area 7. It states, oh, elderly people have a problem reaching the pharmacy in district A. And that changes the focus of all planning and of all solutions completely. We also wrote a manual how to write such a report. And the last project I want to mention is this Transforming Neighborhoods project. That's a project financed by the European government as well. And they do not have the right to issue regulation about cities, but they can support cities. And cities approached the European government and said, our transport is very unfavorable to children. It's unfair to children. It's polluted, it's loud, it's dangerous. Do something about it. The cities wanted to do something about it. And the cities of Zurich and Southampton in England and Tilburg in the Netherlands and Munich in Germany and some parts of cities in Italy and Romania said, we want to establish methods, measures to protect the children. We want to make transport plan from a children's perspective. And that means, for example, the way to the elementary school or to the kindergarten, that has to be on foot and not on a back seat of a car in the children's seat. So we are changing actually with the cities, the neighborhood of the streets and the neighborhood of the areas where people are living. A typical example is we block the school in front, the road in front of the school for 1 hour in the morning. So every kid has to walk to the school, rain or shine. Every kid is not allowed to be brought by mom in a big pickup truck again, because that's just too dangerous. And that changes perception as well. There is a website, if you want to look it up, metamorphosisproject.eu. There are many, many videos. We want to convince cities to follow on this path. That's another example. Conclusion for my talk. Let's talk about Agenda 2, stable systems. You can call it sustainable development. And in transport, there are 7 key issues. Issue number 1, already known for generations, you cannot build your way out of congestion. If you make traffic more attractive, you get more of that. So you have to balance the benefits, and true prices play a key role here. If you have more traffic, you will have higher costs for building and maintaining, and higher environmental costs, and eventually less mobility for the weaker parts of the population. And that's a problem. If you have a technological fix, and our societies tend to promote technology is a solution to everything. Go to California, they explain it to you in detail. Well, we had to recognize technological fixes sometimes worsen the situation. because they make traffic more attractive. And if you have autonomous cars, you will have more traffic. It's so obvious. Promoting electric vehicles, that's what we are doing right now in Germany. We give money to the buyers of electric cars, results in more cars. Well, if you give money to people to buy cars, they will do so. We have more traffic because of this. We have more noise, more urban sprawl, more climate change because you need to build those cars. It's a problem. Number 4, with walking and biking, you cannot do any wrong because walking and biking give you a lot of mobility at almost 0 costs. In the beginning, I said which country is less developed and which country is more developed. Now, as an engineer, as an engineering department, we measure the progress on the path towards sustainable development. And you can measure the unsustainability, the degree of unsustainable solutions. For example, if a city needs more fossil energy, well, it's less sustainable. Which city do you think is less unsustainable? A German city or a city in Latin America, a village in Africa, or in a country in Asia? Well, we measure the amount of technology needs, of mobility needs satisfied, and those are on this planet similar, very much similar. Everybody on average makes 3 trips door to door per day. But the cost, the resources, the fossil fuel, the number of cars is highly different. And the German city needs a lot of energy, produces a lot of noise and pollution for the same amount of mobility. And that's just inefficient. If you go to a tiny village in Sri Lanka, I'm pretty sure they are mobile as well, at a different way, but with less cars and less fossil energy and less noise and less area consumption. And I call this more developed. So I tell our German students, go to African or Asian villages, check how transport is working there. And if they use less energy, they are more developed than Dresden in Germany, to give an example. The key for this lies in good governance and good framework conditions and in true prices. The costs of damaging the environment should be paid by the users because they then try to avoid it. And then behavior changes are easy. And only then innovation and technology contributes to SD, to sustainable development. We have many more cases where they are not contributing. We have to be careful about this. All the best to you, all the best to this conference and to your career. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Becker, for your inspiring and